The fluorescent lights of the conference room hummed a monotonous, soul-crushing drone, a sound that had been the backdrop to my life for 22 years. It was a sound I had once associated with productivity, with the thrum of a well-oiled machine. But today, it sounded like a death knell, each buzz a nail being hammered into the coffin of my career. I sat there in the sterile, air-conditioned chill, my hands folded calmly on the polished mahogany table. A feigned composure, a mask of professionalism I had perfected over 2 decades. Across from me sat Allison Brandt, our new Wunderkind manager, fresh out of an MBA program with a mind full of spreadsheets and a heart full of ambition. She was a caricature of modern corporate efficiency, all sharp angles and crisply ironed blazers. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun that seemed to accentuate the coldness in her eyes. She hadn't been with us for more than 3 months, a blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things, but in that time, she had managed to dissect our department with the detached precision of a surgeon, though without any of the intent to heal. "We need fresh blood and lower salaries," Allison said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a shard of glass. The words hung there, obscene in their bluntness. She didn't flinch. She didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail against the table, a rhythmic, impatient sound that grated on my last nerve. "You're too senior for our budget, Teresa. We're restructuring. You'll need to pack up today." I looked at her, truly looked at her. She couldn't have been more than 28. She saw me as a fossil, an outdated expense on a balance sheet, a line item to be struck through with a red pen. She had no concept of the history I held within me, the institutional knowledge that wasn't written in any manual. I was the one who had trained half the staff in this department. Jennifer Martinez, our logistics coordinator, had come to me straight out of college, eager but clueless. I had mentored her, taught her the intricate dance of medical supply logistics, and watched her blossom into one of our most capable employees. David Chen from Inventory Management. I'd helped him navigate his first major crisis when a shipment of temperature-sensitive medications was stranded in a summer heatwave. Michael Torres, who now managed our entire pharmaceutical division, I had hired him myself, seeing a spark of brilliance that others had overlooked. I had been the steady heartbeat of Eastridge Medical Logistics Operations Department here in Phoenix, Arizona, for over 2 decades. I was the person everyone called when things went wrong, the one who worked late nights and weekend emergencies, without a single complaint. I had navigated 5 different leadership changes, each one bringing a new wave of policies and personalities. Through every crisis, every market fluctuation, every logistical nightmare, I had been the one who kept the wheels turning. And now, all that dedication, all that loyalty, was being reduced to a budget line item by a woman who still had the new car smell on her business degree. My name is Teresa Dalton, and at 59 years old, I had just been told I was too expensive to keep around. The irony wasn't lost on me. For over 20 years, I had saved this company millions through my meticulous planning, my network of contacts, and my almost supernatural ability to foresee problems before they arose. I had built relationships with suppliers and clients that were based on trust and a handshake, relationships that had weathered storms that would have sunk lesser companies. And now, I was being discarded for a younger, cheaper model. "I completely understand the business decision," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it would crack my face. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I saw a flicker of surprise in Allison's eyes. She had probably expected tears, begging, a desperate plea to keep the job that had defined my adult life. She had a file on me, no doubt, detailing my salary, my age, my tenure. But there was one thing her color-coded spreadsheets couldn't tell her. What Allison didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known despite all her analysis, was that I had been preparing for this moment for months. The writing had been on the wall since the day she arrived, questioning every process, every procedure, every person who had been there longer than her morning latte. I had seen this coming from a mile away. As I walked out of that conference room, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't defeat. It was something else entirely, something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. I walked back to my desk, the open plan office, a familiar sea of faces that now looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. They had heard the whispers. They knew what was happening. My desk was an island of personal history in a sea of corporate gray. There were photos of my nephew's graduation, a small, resilient cactus garden that had somehow flourished under my care, awards for customer service excellence, and a stack of thank you cards from grateful clients. These were the artifacts of a career built on more than just numbers. Jennifer Martinez looked up from her computer as I passed, her dark eyes wide with concern. She had been one of my first hires 8 years ago, a bright-eyed kid straight out of college with a degree in supply chain management and more enthusiasm than experience. I had taken her under my wing. Now, she managed our largest accounts with the kind of precision I had taught her. "Teresa? How did the meeting go?" she asked, her voice a hushed whisper, though her expression told me she already knew the answer. I paused at her desk, choosing my words carefully. The last thing I wanted was to create panic or badmouth the company that had been my professional home for so long. "It's a business decision," I explained, echoing Allison's cold, corporate jargon. I started carefully packing my personal belongings into a cardboard box. "They're moving in a new direction." Her face fell. "But you're the backbone of this place." "Things change, Jen," I said, giving her a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Soon, a small crowd had gathered around my desk. These were the people I had hired, trained, and mentored through their careers. I had attended their weddings, celebrated their promotions, helped them navigate difficult clients and impossible deadlines. They weren't just colleagues, they were family. Michael Torres, a man I had personally championed for the pharmaceutical logistics head, shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered. "You know more about medical supply chains than anyone in the industry. Who's going to handle the Morrison account? Or deal with the regulatory compliance updates?" That was the question, wasn't it? I had built so many of our processes from the ground up, developed relationships with suppliers and clients that took years to cultivate. My institutional knowledge was vast, and until today, I had assumed it was valued. "You'll all figure it out," I said, though privately, I wondered how Allison planned to replace 22 years of experience with her fresh blood and lower salaries. As I sealed the box with tape, I caught sight of Allison watching from her glass-walled office window. She had that look managers get when they're second-guessing a major decision but are too proud to admit it. For just a moment, I felt sorry for her. She had no idea what she was about to lose, what kind of chaos was heading her way. But that sympathy faded quickly. This was her choice, her strategy. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The elevator ride down to the parking garage felt like the longest 2 minutes of my life. 22 years of memories flashed through my mind. My first day, when the company occupied just 2 floors of this building. The late nights during the healthcare crisis 3 years ago, when we worked around the clock to ensure critical supplies reached hospitals. The celebrations when we landed major contracts that everyone said were impossible to win. I had given this company the best years of my career, and now I was leaving with nothing but a cardboard box and a severance package that would barely cover 3 months of expenses. But as I loaded the box into my silver Honda Civic, I couldn't help but smile. Because what Allison didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that I hadn't spent the last year sitting idle, waiting for the axe to fall. 6 months ago, I had been approached by former colleagues, Patricia Wong and James Rodriguez, who had left Eastridge to start their own medical logistics company in Denver. InnovaCare Solutions was small but growing rapidly, and they needed someone with deep industry experience to help them scale their operations. They had been persistent in their courtship, offering me consulting work that I had been doing quietly on weekends and evenings. The founders, Patricia and James, were brilliant minds who understood that in medical logistics, relationships and experience mattered more than cost-cutting and fresh blood. They had been waiting patiently for me to be ready to make the jump. And just last week, they had closed a significant funding round that would allow them to offer me something Eastridge never could, a true partnership in building something revolutionary. My phone buzzed as I sat in my car in the parking garage. It was a text from Patricia. How did it go? Are you ready to change the industry? I typed back quickly. Let's do this. Within an hour of leaving Eastridge for the last time, I was on a video call with Patricia and James, officially accepting their offer to become Chief Operating Officer of Innovacare Solutions. The title alone was worth more than the salary Allison had deemed too expensive, but more importantly, I would have equity in a company that valued innovation over budget cuts. That evening, as I sat in my apartment reviewing the employment contract that would change my life, I thought about Allison's confident proclamation about fresh blood and lower salaries. She believed that experience was just overhead, that institutional knowledge was replaceable with enthusiasm and lower paychecks. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The industry was smaller than most people realized. Word traveled fast when someone with my reputation made a move. By tomorrow morning, the news would start spreading through the networks I had spent decades building. And once the official announcement hit the trade publications next week, everyone would know that Teresa Dalton wasn't retiring or fading away. I was just getting started. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity that felt more energizing than any vacation I had taken in years. While Allison was presumably congratulating herself on cutting costs, I was busy building something that would shake the foundations of our industry. My first week at Innovacare Solutions felt like coming home to a family I hadn't known I was missing. The Denver headquarters buzzed with the kind of energy that only exists in companies where every person believes they're changing the world. Patricia and James had assembled a team of brilliant minds who were tired of the bureaucracy and stagnation that plagued larger firms. Teresa, we need your opinion on the Morrison contract approach, Patricia said during my second day, sliding a proposal across the conference table. Morrison Medical was one of the largest hospital networks in the Southwest and, coincidentally, one of Eastridge's most profitable accounts. I studied the proposal, recognizing immediately that Patricia had done her homework. This wasn't just about undercutting prices. It was about offering a level of service and innovation that established companies like Eastridge simply couldn't match with their bloated overhead and outdated systems. This is good, I said, making notes in the margins. But Morrison's purchasing manager, Helen Foster, values personal relationships above everything else. I've worked with her for 12 years. She's been frustrated with Eastridge's slow response times lately. James leaned forward, interested. What would it take to get a meeting? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, a database of relationships built over 2 decades that was worth more than any salary Allison could have paid me. Give me an hour. By the end of that hour, I had secured a meeting with Helen for the following week. Not only that, but 2 other major accounts had agreed to preliminary discussions after hearing I had joined Innovacare. Word was already spreading through the industry network that something interesting was happening in Denver. Meanwhile, back in Phoenix, things weren't going quite as smoothly as Allison had anticipated. Jennifer had called me 3 times with questions about processes that weren't documented anywhere but in my head. The pharmaceutical compliance audit that I usually handled was approaching, and nobody seemed to know where to start. Teresa, I hate to bother you, Jennifer said during our latest call, but the FDA inspector is coming next week, and Allison is asking about the Henderson Protocol. I've never heard of it. The Henderson Protocol was something I had developed 5 years ago after a near disaster with temperature-sensitive medications. It wasn't written down anywhere because it was more of an approach than a rigid procedure, the kind of institutional knowledge that took years to develop and couldn't be replaced by fresh blood and enthusiasm. It's not in any manual, I explained patiently. It's about reading the inspector's priorities and adjusting your presentation accordingly. Tell Allison she might want to postpone the audit until she has a better handle on compliance procedures. What I didn't mention was that postponing an FDA audit was incredibly difficult and made companies look incompetent. On Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after my departure, I received a call that would change everything. Helen Foster from Morrison Medical was on the line, and she sounded frustrated. Teresa, I'm glad I caught you, she said. We've been having some serious issues with our Eastridge account. Response times are terrible, and their new manager seems to have no idea how our operation works. I heard through the grapevine that you've moved to a different company. Are you taking new clients? I looked across the InnovaCare office, where Patricia was presenting our newest service innovations to a team of eager analysts. The future was happening right here, right now. Helen, I said, I think we should definitely meet. The Morrison medical meeting exceeded even my most optimistic expectations. Helen Foster sat across from Patricia, James, and me in their corporate conference room, reviewing our service proposal with the kind of attention that made it clear this wasn't just a courtesy meeting. This is exactly what we've been looking for, Helen said, tapping the section about real-time inventory tracking. Eastridge promised us this capability 3 years ago, but they never delivered. How quickly could you implement? Patricia exchanged a glance with me before answering. With Teresa leading the implementation, we could have the basic system running within 60 days. Full optimization within 90. Helen's eyes lit up. That's impressive. What about regulatory compliance? That's been our biggest headache lately. This was where my decades of experience became truly valuable. Helen, you know I've been handling Morrison's compliance needs for over 8 years, I said. I know every detail of your operation, every potential pain point. We're not just offering compliance management, we're offering peace of mind. The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering everything from pricing structures to implementation timelines. By the end, Helen was ready to move forward with a pilot program that would transition Morrison's entire Southwest region to InnovaCare within 6 months. As we shook hands in the parking lot, Helen pulled me aside. Teresa, I have to ask, how did Eastridge let you go? Sometimes companies make decisions they don't fully understand, I replied diplomatically. But their loss is InnovaCare's gain. Walking back to our rental car, Patricia was practically glowing. That was incredible. 1 meeting, and we just landed our biggest client ever? This is just the beginning, I said, checking my phone for messages. 3 more former Eastridge clients had requested meetings after hearing about my move. The industry grapevine was working exactly as I had expected. Back in Phoenix, the ripple effects were becoming impossible to ignore. David Chun had called that morning to tell me that Jennifer had submitted her resignation. Michael Torres was interviewing with competitors. Even worse for Allison, the FDA audit had been a disaster, resulting in a formal warning that would require months of remediation work. She's panicking, David told me during our call. Allison keeps asking if you left any documentation about procedures you developed. I told her you probably took all your knowledge with you. The truth was, I hadn't taken anything that belonged to Eastridge. But the knowledge in my head, the relationships I had built, the instincts I had developed, those weren't company property. Those were mine, earned through years of dedication and expertise. That afternoon, James gathered the InnovaCare team for our weekly strategy meeting. The energy in the room was electric as we reviewed our expanding client pipeline and discussed hiring plans to handle our rapid growth. Thanks to Teresa's industry connections, James announced, we're looking at a 300% revenue increase over the next quarter. We're going to need to expand the team significantly. As the meeting continued, I couldn't help but think about Allison's confidence that fresh blood and lower salaries were the key to success. She had been so focused on cutting costs that she had forgotten the fundamental truth of the service industry. Relationships and expertise were irreplaceable. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw it was from Robert Kim, one of Eastridge's biggest pharmaceutical clients. Heard you made a move. Interested in discussing our account. When can we talk? I showed the message to Patricia, who grinned widely. Should I start drafting another contract? Better make it 2, I said, scrolling through 3 more similar messages that had just arrived. This is going to be a busy week. By the end of my 3rd week at InnovaCare, the transformation was complete. Not just for me, but for the entire competitive landscape of medical logistics in the Southwest. What had started as Allison's cost-cutting measure had turned into an industry-wide shift that nobody could have predicted. The official press release went out on a Tuesday morning. Fast-rising medical startup announces veteran COO Teresa Dalton launches aggressive talent acquisition initiative. Patricia had worked with a public relations firm to ensure the announcement reached every major trade publication and industry newsletter simultaneously. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, my LinkedIn profile had been viewed over 1,000 times. Former colleagues, clients, and competitors reached out with congratulations, questions, and thinly veiled inquiries about job opportunities. The medical logistics community was small and interconnected, and news like this traveled fast. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. Jennifer called me just after lunch, her voice excited in a way I hadn't heard since her early days at Eastridge. "Teresa, you're not going to believe this," she said. "Allison just came out of an emergency meeting with the executive team. She looked like she'd seen a ghost." "What happened?" Morrison Medical sent a formal termination notice this morning. Helen Foster specifically mentioned that they were moving to a company with more experienced leadership. Then Robert Kim from FarmCorp called and requested an immediate review of their contract terms. 2 other major clients have scheduled meetings with the executives next week. The domino effect was exactly what I had anticipated, but even I was surprised by how quickly it was happening. When companies lose their most experienced personnel, especially in relationship-driven industries, the impact isn't always immediate. But medical logistics was different. Trust and reliability were everything, and clients had no patience for learning curves when people's health was at stake. "How's Allison handling it?" I asked, though I could already guess the answer. "She's been in her office all afternoon making phone calls. Word is she's trying to hire back some of the people who left after you did, but they're not interested. David got an offer from one of your former clients to start their own in-house logistics team. Michael's already accepted a position with MedTech Solutions." The talent exodus was accelerating, just as I had known it would. Allison had underestimated the loyalty and respect I had earned over the years. When experienced professionals saw how the company treated someone with my track record, they started questioning their own futures there. That evening, Patricia, James, and I celebrated at an upscale restaurant in downtown Denver. The reservation was ostensibly to discuss our expansion plans, but it felt more like a victory party. To Teresa, Patricia raised her glass of wine, for showing us that experience and expertise aren't just line items on a budget. They're the foundation of everything we do. As we clinked glasses, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 3 weeks. A month ago, I had been seen as an expensive liability, someone whose years of knowledge and hard-earned expertise were viewed as obstacles to efficiency rather than assets to be valued. Now, I was a partner in one of the fastest-growing companies in my industry, with equity that would secure my financial future and the respect that I had always deserved. My phone buzzed with another message, this one from a former Eastridge client, then another. The pipeline of opportunities just kept growing. "You know," I said to Patricia and James, "I think we're going to need a bigger office." They laughed, but I wasn't joking. The momentum we had built was only going to accelerate. And Allison's decision to eliminate my position? It was going to keep paying dividends for years to come. The phone call came on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 month after Allison had told me I was too senior for the budget. I was reviewing quarterly projections in my new corner office at InnovaCare when my assistant announced that someone from Eastridge was on the line. "Teresa Dalton speaking," I answered, already knowing what this call would be about. "Teresa, this is Robert Harrison, Executive Vice President at Eastridge." His voice carried the weight of desperation, masked as professional courtesy. "I was hoping we could discuss your departure and perhaps explore options for collaboration." Robert had been with Eastridge for 15 years, long enough to understand the value of institutional knowledge, but not senior enough to have prevented Allison's cost-cutting crusade. Now he was tasked with cleaning up the mess. "Of course, Robert. What can I help you with?" "We've been experiencing some challenges since your departure," he said carefully. "Several of our major clients have expressed concerns about service continuity. Morrison Medical has already terminated their contract, and FarmCorp is threatening to follow suit unless we can address their compliance concerns." I let the silence stretch for a moment, allowing the full weight of Eastridge's situation to settle between us. Through my office window, I could see Patricia presenting our latest client acquisition numbers to the board of directors. We had signed 4 new major accounts in the past 3 weeks, 3 of them former Eastridge clients. "I'm sorry to hear about those challenges," I said finally. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We'd like to offer you a consulting contract," Robert continued. "Something that would allow you to help us transition your former accounts and perhaps provide guidance on regulatory compliance procedures." The irony was breathtaking. A month ago, my knowledge and experience had been too expensive to keep on payroll. Now, they wanted to pay consultant rates for the same expertise they had dismissed as unnecessary overhead. "Robert, I appreciate the offer, but I'm quite busy with my new role as Chief Operating Officer at InnovaCare Solutions. We're in the middle of a significant expansion phase." The pause on his end told me he was processing the implications. My title at InnovaCare was higher than anything I had ever held at Eastridge, and consultant rates for someone at my level would cost them far more than my original salary had. "Would you consider a part-time arrangement?" he asked. "We could work around your schedule." "I'm afraid that's not possible," I replied. "However, I wish you the best in finding solutions to your challenges." After hanging up, I couldn't help but smile. The desperation in Robert's voice had been unmistakable. 2 days later, the final blow landed with surgical precision. Patricia knocked on my office door with a grin that could have powered the entire building. "Teresa, you need to see this," she said, placing a printed email on my desk. The message was from Helen Foster at Morrison Medical, but it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to our entire industry network, copied to dozens of medical logistics professionals, suppliers, and decision-makers across the Southwest. "To whom it may concern," the email began. "Morrison Medical would like to formally recommend InnovaCare Solutions and Chief Operating Officer, Teresa Dalton, for any organization seeking exceptional medical logistics services. After years of declining service quality and unresponsive management from our previous provider, InnovaCare has restored our confidence in third-party logistics partnerships." The email went on to detail specific improvements in response times, compliance management, and cost efficiency that we had achieved in just 4 weeks of service. But the final paragraph was the most devastating part for Eastridge. "We particularly want to highlight the difference that experienced leadership makes in this industry. When companies value fresh blood over proven expertise, they do a disservice to their clients and, ultimately, to patient care. We are grateful to have found a partner that understands the critical importance of knowledge, relationships, and reliability in medical logistics." The email had been sent to over 200 industry professionals, including several Eastridge clients who were now questioning their own service agreements. Within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from potential clients who had seen Helen's endorsement. By the end of the day, we had scheduled preliminary meetings with 6 new prospects, including 2 of Eastridge's largest remaining accounts. "You realize what this means?" Patricia asked as we reviewed the latest inquiries. "It means Allison's strategy of cutting costs by eliminating experience just cost them their reputation," I replied. The revenge was complete, and I hadn't had to lift a finger. The industry had done it for me. As I sat in my Denver office that evening, watching the sunset paint the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and crimson, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me here. Allison's decision to eliminate my position had felt like the end of something precious, but it had actually been the beginning of something extraordinary. Not just a new job, but a new understanding of my own worth and the irreplaceable value of hard-earned expertise in a world obsessed with cost-cutting and quick fixes.